What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to talk about deck building and all of the concepts you've ever wanted to know. We're going to keep it real simple, ELI5 style. Hopefully you'll be able to pick up absolutely all the concepts and be able to be building decks of your own in no time. We'll even do an example deck build at the end of this little PowerPoint I threw together. So let's dive in. So before we can figure out what to put in a deck and how to build the deck, we need to ask why we're building a deck. Some of the options, you might think it's just to win the game. That's the only reason to build a deck, right? You could also build a deck just to have fun. I love to build meme decks all the time. Play some fun, underused cards that when they pop off, they do crazy things, but they're not very easy to play. So you play those during the weekdays, and then we play to win during the weekend ranked. So today we're going to take a look at, namely, how to win games with nice decks. Not the meme versions. But if you're asking yourself how to win a game, you got to figure out your win conditions. So before you do any building in your deck, you need to know how you're going to win the game. If you don't have a way to win the game, if you're not planning on putting this into your deck, if you're just throwing 30 random cards and hoping that something works, you're not going to win many games. So what is a win condition exactly? It's basically just a way that pretty much guarantees victory if you're able to execute. So for instance, if you're playing Nature, charging Oryx could be your win condition. If you have two of these things, they can actually God Blitz effectively with its Roar, go straight into your opponent's God for 7 damage. If you have two of them, that's 14. So this could be a win condition. If you're playing aggro, you could play a chicken and then the egg pops out. You're just trying to spam as many creatures as possible. Combos like this can be a win condition. Basically, you're just planning on flooding the board and making it impossible for your opponent to catch up, and you're going to win the game by turn 5. You could also be playing control decks and have win conditions like massive 9-drops that are very powerful, that can win you the game. And so I just used words like control and aggro. Let's see, what do those even mean? These are important archetypes that fit into the curve. So what are archetypes and curve? What is all this stuff? I just want to build a deck. Well, in order to build a deck, you need to know what type of deck you're building. You've got aggro decks. They could look something like this. They don't have to look exactly like this. Don't use this as a hard and fast rule of you must have 13 1-drops, 11 2-drops, 4 3-drops, and 2 4-drops, and no other cards. But this is a typical aggro curve. You'll see a ton of low-cost creatures and a couple spells. But this is the number of cards at each mana. This is actually a deck that I played and came in the top 10 recently with. Then we have mid-range. Mid-range, you can see there's still a lot of 1 and 2 drops, but this goes all the way up to 7. 7 is the typical top end of mid-range decks, because at 7 mana, there's a big power jump. So cards at 6 mana can have decent abilities and stuff, but once you get to 7 is the real key number in Gods Unchained, where cards start to get very powerful. Things like Ashen Drake, the Charging Oryx we just saw, Demogorgon. There's a lot of powerful 7-drops. So if you're trying to win a game in a mid-range deck, you're going to want your deck to top out around 6 or 7. And then we have control decks, and you can see control decks. Again, we still have a lot of early game here with the 2-drops, and that's because you need to make sure you survive. You can't just put all 6+ mana cards in your deck, or you won't survive up to 9. So here's a typical curve of a control deck. All 3 of these curves are actually straight from decks that I have gotten in the top 10 with in recent weeks and months. So this was, I think, either the Nature one or the Magic one. But basically, you've got 2 9-drops here. Yeah, this was the Magic one. 2 9-drops. And the 8-drop is Frey, Avatar of Magic, and Echophone. So in order to get up to these cards, we have 7-drops like Demogorgon. We have Astric Implosions at 6. So you can tell this is the Magic deck right here. But So these are your 3 different options. Control, we had all kinds of board wipes in here, spells that keep the single target removal, AoE. So what's single target removal and AoE for ELI 5 purposes? So AoE means full board clears typically. So something like Astric Implosion does damage to every single creature. Wildfire, Hunt, Apocalypse Now, Black Blood Blast, Dust to Dust, things like that attack the entire board, do damage to everything, keep it clear. Enchanted Vines does 4 damage to 4 different creatures for nature. So these AoE type spells are going to be huge in control decks. So if you're a free-to-play player and you just don't have those cards yet, I would recommend staying away from control. But you should have the ability to play aggro or mid-range just right off the bat as a free-to-play player. So let's look at some tips real quick. So tip number 1 is modify existing meta decks. So you can actually go on gudex.com and check out what other decks are performing well. See if you have any of the cards for it. If you're a free-to-play player, maybe you barely have any of the cards, but you can at least see the type of archetypes that are working well currently in the existing environment. If there are a ton of aggro decks playing at the moment and they're all performing really well, maybe that means you should also be trying to play an aggro deck. If you see tons of control decks in the top of the charts, maybe you should try to play a control deck. Meta moves back and forth, and you need to just constantly be aware of what's going on. Otherwise, the deck that you play one week, which was good one week, might not be good the next week, especially if cards were balanced or if people just discovered a cool new combo that everybody wants to be playing. So that's tip number 1. We'll check out GU decks in just a minute here, and I'll show you guys more. Tip number 2, don't include many singletons. So I've seen a lot of people ask questions recently about like, hey, is my deck good? And they include tons of singletons. Sometimes 30 unique cards per deck. And the reason you don't want to do this is most games will only go approximately 10 rounds, which means you're only going to see about 15 cards from your deck, which is half of your deck. So that means if you have 30 unique cards in your deck, you could play back-to-back games and never get the exact same card that you had in either game. And effectively, you're playing with 2 totally different decks. So you want to have cards that you actually want to be drawing. And if you want to be drawing those cards, then you probably want 2 copies in your deck. Now, of course, legendary cards you can only have 1 of. So of course, there are exceptions to the rule as well for commons, rares, and epics. If you have some type of card in your deck that you're like, oh, if I drew 2 of these off the start, I would just lose the game outright because I definitely can't use 2 of them. You definitely don't want to include 2 of them. So, of course, there are exceptions to the rule, but you definitely don't want to include too many singletons for consistency. And in the mulligan, if you get rid of a card, if you have 2 of that card in your deck, getting rid of 1, you can no longer draw the other copy either. So in the mulligan, you'll actually be able to get better draws because if you get rid of, say, so let's say a 6-drop, like the Helion Blade Master, if you have 2 copies in your deck and you say, oh, I definitely don't want that in my opening hand, if you get rid of 1, you will not be able to draw the other one during the mulligan phase. It could be the first card you draw once the mulligan phase is done, but while you're mulliganing, you cannot draw the other or the same Helion Blade Master. So if you include 2 different 6-drops instead of 2 of the same one, it's possible then that you could get rid of the 1 6-drop and then draw the other 6-drop, and you don't want to get stuck with the 6-drop. So keeping singletons to a minimum is best for multiple reasons. Next up is pick an archetype you enjoy and get good at it. If you're an aggro player, try and play aggro. Get good at it. Learn how to build decks for it. if you're new to this and you're like, I didn't even know aggro, mid-range, or control was a thing until just now, try all three. See which one you like the best. Look at your cards. If you're a free-to-play player, if you don't have any spells, you probably shouldn't try and play control. It's going to be very difficult, so maybe pick a different archetype. But basically, when you're starting out and you're trying to get good at building decks, just pick one of the three archetypes and get good at it. And of course, there are other semi-archetypes as well, things like combo decks and that kind of thing. But you can really look at the three main archetypes that I just showed as an ELI 5. Those are the only ones to look at for now. It's basically everything. Next up is utilize synergies to your advantage. So in order to find synergies, you need to know basically every card in the game, right? How would you know that there's a synergy if you didn't even know that card existed? Which means looking through all of your cards, learning what they do, finding out, oh, if I have a chicken, it has an egg. If I destroy an egg with Demonic Offering, it's going to be huge for me. You need to find that synergy. So if you find it yourself, you can do it by going through all your cards and looking for that kind of thing. Or you can always look at top players, see what they're doing. You can check my previous YouTube videos. You'll find tons of synergies. You can check out my stream, always playing games, watching the pros play. You will see a lot of things that you didn't know about. You can learn a ton. So highly recommend to do that. Build decks around cards you know are in the meta. So this is basically a similar tip where you need to know what's going on in the meta. So that means you could watch pros play. It means you could just based on the fact that you constantly see other people playing the card. Maybe it's a Canopy Barrage. That card is definitely in the meta. Maybe you keep seeing that card. And that actually goes into the next tip here, which is learn how to identify good cards by their stats or constantly getting wrecked by it. Maybe you constantly get wrecked by things like The Hunt or a full board clear like Astric Implosion. If you constantly are seeing Astric Implosion, it's because it's a really good card, and you should build a deck around that card as well. And learning how to identify good cards by their stats, you can basically look at something like a 1-drop and say, hey, it should have at least 2/2 worth of stats. Things like the Wild Hog is a 1-drop. It's a 2/3. It has Confused. That's why it has that extra stat. It has the downside of being confused, but that extra stat could very well be worth it. For a 2-drop, you basically have 2/3 as the top end, or 2/4 if you're looking at a Skeleton Heavy. That is a lot of stats for a 2-drop. Skeleton Heavy is a very good card. One of the best cards in the game that you should put in every single deck is a Vanguard Axewoman. It is a 2-drop that is a 2/3, and it has Blitz, which means you can play it on your turn and clear one of their cards for 2 mana, which is a huge swing. So you definitely want to include the Vanguard Axewoman in almost every deck. It works great in aggro, works great in mid-range, and it can even work in control. So that's just a great card to have pretty much in every single deck. So that's one good card that you can identify just by constantly getting wrecked by it. You'll see other people playing it. And its stats are a 2/3 for a 2-drop, which is good. For a 3-drop, you'll see things like a 3/4 if it has no text, like a Hunt Warden, or a Dune Cavalry is a 3/4. And then typically the cards will be around 3/3. So if you're looking at stats, they should be something like a 4-drop is a 4/4 or a 4/5 with no text, like the Ogre. A 5-drop would be something like a 5/5 or a 5/6 with no text. So that's how you can kind of identify how many stats you should be getting. And if something is highly understated, it better have a lot of synergy with your deck, and it better be easy to play. So something that maybe costs more, if it's highly understated, It's going to be more difficult to play as a synergy because you need to play maybe 2 cards, but it's very expensive, so it's very difficult to pull off. So avoid things that are too expensive, that are understated. The last tip here is join CopperPitch's Discord, where people will be happy to look at your deck list and make suggestions. Link in the description below. So people post their deck lists all the time, and including myself, and it's good to just get feedback from other people in the Discord and say, hey, what do you guys think? Am I forgetting a card? Did I overlook something? Is there an obvious miss here? Did I forget to put Vanguard Axewoman's in my deck? You should always put Vanguard Axewoman's in your deck. So that's the last tip. Let's actually do an example now. We're going to go over to gudex.com, and I will show you guys how to use the deck builder. All right, so here we are at gudex.com. I'm going to click on decks, and then I'm going to click deck builder. And this deck builder is nicer than the current iteration of what is in the launcher, in the immutable launcher, but they are redoing it, and so hopefully at some point it will be nicer than this. The downside of this is it doesn't show you which cards you own. You can technically like log in, but it doesn't know what cards aren't minted to the blockchain, and all of your core cards are going to be unminted right now. And even once minting is available, you're not going to mint literally all of your cards, so it's not going to know all of your cards. And the current set, Trial of the Gods, is not on here because it's not minted. And then even when that's minted, the new set after that will not be minted until after it's done being sold. So basically, this is always going to not know what cards you have actually. So you kind of right now have to combine GUDEX with the immutable launcher. But let's just imagine we owned all the cards here. But if you don't have all the cards and you only have one of some or don't have any of others, you need to make sure you check your own collection to see if you have those cards. So we're going to do a free-to-play deck here. And like I said before, the options for free-to-play, we're going to say that control is not an option. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule. Especially if you've played some weekend ranks, you could still be a free-to-play player and have lots of Trial of the Gods cards. Some people I know have almost literally a full set of Trial of the Gods, and they've never paid a penny. So it's absolutely possible to have won a lot of Trial of the Gods cards, but we're going to exclude those today. So we're either going to build aggro or mid-range, and I did not plan this, we could either go Animal Bond tier and do an aggro type deck, or we could go mid-range with Leech Life. So I'm going to go mid-range with Leech Life, but let's look at Animal Bond real quick to talk about synergies, because there's an easy, obvious one here, and that is Best Friends and Card Shark. So turn 1, if you're playing aggro, you could play Card Shark. It summons 2 creatures. You can then use your bag to play a second card, and that second card could be Best Friends. And if you have at least 3 creatures on board, Best Friends already summons an eagle. You already played 2 with the Card Shark, so you have 3 on board. You now also summon a badger, which means on turn 1, you get to drop 4 creatures for 2 mana. It's a huge play on turn 1. So this is like an obvious synergy. So we talked about how synergy is super important. This is also a welcome set card, so you can totally play this free to play. And Card Shark is a rare core card, so you probably have 1. You might have 2. But let's go back. Let's go back to the deck builder here, and this time we're going to pick Leech Life. We're going to build a mid-range nature deck. I think mid-range nature is probably the easiest free-to-play deck out there. So what we're going to do is we're going to click the set drop-down, check off core and welcome, and nothing else. Of course, if you have Trial of the Gods cards, you can feel free to check off Trial of the Gods and add some of those in. But this will make it nice and easy to filter out all the cards that we don't have. And maybe you're super new and you're like, I don't have epic cards yet. I don't have legendary cards. You can even filter out the rarity and say, I only want to see common and rare. You can get very granular here. And then you can also sort by creature, spell, and relic. So some of the most important things to know if you have when you're starting out are spells, because there are some very important spells like Canopy Barrage, and possibly the Hunt. This is a common card, so hopefully you have a copy. This is a common card, so hopefully you have a copy. If you don't have one immediately, you'll probably be able to unlock them pretty quickly because they're common in the core set. Lightning Strike is also very nice. So when we went and test built an aggro deck a second ago, even though this is one of the best removal cards in the game, playing aggro, I would not play Lightning Strike because our win condition is getting as many creatures out as fast as possible, and we want to win before basically like turn 5. We want the game to be in our control and basically done. And Lightning Strike is excellent at being only 3 mana and yet being able to remove creatures that are like 7 or 8 mana. So we're not trying to stick around to 7 mana when we're playing aggro. But in mid-range, we absolutely want Lightning Strike. You might not need 2. In mid-range, you might only want 1. This could be an instance of a 1-of. In fact, I probably only would play 1 because, it's one of those things, if you get stuck with 2 of these in your hand early, it's not great. Canopy Barrage, always 2 of. This is such a good card. I'd play it in aggro, mid-range, and control. I am going to drop a Lightning Strike here. Again, another card that's phenomenal in some decks, is terrible in other decks. This Arrow of Rage deals X damage to an enemy creature where X is equal to the strength of a random creature you control. So if you're playing a bunch of little badgers and eagles and 1 and 2 drops, this is only ever going to do like 2 damage. But if you're playing it in a control deck or a mid-range deck perhaps, this could actually do like an average of 4+ damage if you're only playing creatures that are big and beefy. So for now, we'll sit back and maybe we'll grab one of these. We'll see. We might need it, we might not. I definitely want at least 1 hunt, probably 2. I'm going to grab 2 hunts, so I'm going to get rid of the Arrow of Rage. So if you click cards over here, they remove from the deck. You can see your curve right here. So that's pretty much all the spells that we're going to need. You could use Jump On. Jump On could be a replacement for the Hunt. This gives +3 strength and overkill, which means you could ram a little creature into an opponent creature, and with the +3 strength and overkill, maybe you do 6 damage or something, and the creature that you attack only has like 1 health. It's going to do 5 overkill damage, which is pretty close to the 6 overkill damage effectively that the Hunt is. So you can always find some replacements. You can't find replacements for Canopy Barrage, though. This card is just good. Again, it's common. You should be able to get it pretty quick. And you could play Best Friends in a mid-range deck. I'm going to choose absolutely not to. And now let's filter. We don't need spells anymore. We're going to go Creatures and Relics. So the first thing we need to ask ourselves is our win condition. I went into spells because maybe if you're a free-to-play player, first you need to make sure you actually own these spells, because if you don't, you might not want to play nature, or at least not mid-range nature. Maybe you want to play aggro instead. But the first thing you want to ask yourself is, what's your win condition? So I'm also going to go into mana, and since we're playing mid-range, I'm going to check off 1 through 7. I'm not going to check anything above that, because we're not going to play anything above that. We're going to top out at 7 mana. So it's called curving out at 7 mana. And so now we only have 8 pages of cards here, which makes it nice and limited to be able to see what we have the ability to put in our deck. Makes our options much easier to see. And our win condition is going to be 2 of these Charging Oryxes. This Charging Oryx is extremely powerful. It's one of the best 7-drops in the game. It's a welcome set card, which means everybody has 2 of this automatically from the get-go. And it's one of the best 7-drops in the game, bar none. It's one of the only creatures that can go face the second you drop it. It's called God Blitz. This does not have God Blitz. It actually has a roar that this creature attacks a random valid character. It will attack an enemy with frontline first. It can attack a hidden creature, but if there's no frontline, this can go face. So you could do 7 damage, burst right to their face. So that's our win condition. So now that we know we want to top out at 7, and we know we need to fill in this curve all the way back down, we can actually just scroll backwards here. And I know that I want 2 6-drops. And I know that from what we talked about in tips, I don't want to pick like one Green Giant, one Helion Blade Master, one Minotaur Phalanx. I want two of the same card. We have options here. Those three cards I just pointed out are all phenomenal options. If you only have one Helion Blade Master and one Green Giant, by all means, it's not going to affect your mulligan that much. It might change things by like 1%, which is pretty low, obviously. But when you're talking about the absolute top tiers, that's when you want to look for trying to keep two of the same. All of these things have big stats. So what we're going to try and build in this deck for this mid-range nature deck is we just want a ton of stats. We want to overwhelm our opponent with stats. And that is our win condition, in addition to the Charging Oryx, which the Charging Oryx also has a lot of stats. It's 7/7 for 7, so it's right on curve, but its ability is ridiculous that it can go face instantly. If your opponent has no creatures on board, this automatically goes face, which is awesome. So we know that we want big stats, and again, all three of these are great options. It's kind of hard to even pick here if you have all three options. It's nice to have Ward. Magic has been nerfed a little bit with Blast Wave going away, so that does make Ward a little bit more powerful because it's not as easy to pop Ward constantly now without Blast Wave. The Green Giant has just huge stats, which means it's hard to kill with spells that aren't instant removal. Minotaur Phalanx has big stats, but also has frontline. For now, since we're just trying to go for as many stats as possible, let's go with the Green Giant, but I do think literally any three of these cards could just be absolutely fit into this deck. And because of our curve, we don't want any more 6-drops. If we overload the back end of this deck, it's going to be problematic. So, now we're on to 5-drops. Probably want to add one more 5-drop. We have the 2 Hunts, and I've seen a lot of people playing these Tainted Tree Ants. I don't think they're very good. Look how understated they are. They would need to stick around for probably at least 2 or 3 turns in order for it to be worth it. In a regen deck, maybe you can get away with it, but I would stay away from this card probably, unless you're playing a regen deck. So let's go scroll backwards here. We'll keep going backwards. What do we have? We're looking for stats. This Helios Battlesworn could be great. He's a common. Flamecaller is terrible. Look at these stats. Again, it could work in some decks, but we're looking for stats. Feral Shapeshifter is a little low on stats, but it is nice that it's hidden, and its roar does 2 damage. This is a pretty decent card. But again, I just want big stats that are hard to deal with. And since we're going to drop stat after stat on them, they're not going to know what to do. So that'll be our 5-drop. Now we're down to 4. So for 4, we are a little bit low on removal right now. Veteran Archer is definitely nice. He's a little understated, though, compared to what we want. You could just go Wetlands Ogre, no ability. Again, a lot of options here. There's no right answer all of the time. Sometimes it could just be depending on what you own, what you don't own. This is a common, this is a rare. You might have more Wetlands Ogres, so we'll go with those. Let's scroll back here. Okay, so here's one thing that we do want to tech in, which is this Svart Basilisk. We're gonna drop 2 of these in, and these remove sleep and remove 2 durability from your opponent's relic. So this card is phenomenal in the current meta. They did just add weapon removal, thankfully, back into the Sanctum a few days ago. So there is some relic removal, which means we'll see less relics. So you don't necessarily need this, but we have been seeing a ton of Demogorgons recently, and this can wake up some of your creatures, which is huge. So we're going to put 2 of these Svart Basilisks in. Overgrown Rhinos are amazing. They have huge stats. Like we talked about earlier, for a 4-drop, you're typically going to see something like a 4/4 or a 4/5 with no text. This is a 5/5 because it has the quote-unquote downside of being confused. It's not a huge downside, though. It's definitely worth the stats. You want 2 overgrown rhinos for sure. And then you could even play a Bladefly. If we were playing aggro, 100%. If I'm playing Zoo, I want Bladeflies because they are going to summon 6/6 worth of stats for 4 mana, which is absolutely insane. But they are easier to clear with AoE type spells that do damage to everything. Anything that does 2 damage to everything kills all of your Bladeflies. So we're gonna keep with our strat here of just overwhelm them with stats. And also when we're talking about as many stats as possible, here's a 3-drop that's a 4/3. So you might say, okay, yep, that's the same as a 3/4. It's not. You definitely want to keep creatures that have more health than attack, because if your creature dies, it's not going to help you anymore. It's gone. And in this game, it's easy enough to just, roar and do a couple damage to something and just take it out quickly. So you want things with as much health to stick around for as long as possible. Let's scroll back here. How many cards are we at? So we're at 17 out of 30. So far, our curve is looking pretty good. The 4-drops might be a little heavy, but we'll see here. We might not need these Wetlands Ogres. I forgot that we had the Svart Basilisks to put in and the Overgrown Rhinos. So these might be enough 4-drops. Honestly, we probably don't need the Wetlands Ogre, but we'll see what else we've got here. We were just talking about 3/4s. I think the Dune Cavalries are absolutely worth it. A Hunt Warden is the same exact card, except it's welcome set, so you can definitely put in 2 Hunt Wardens. You'll have those. Not liking anything else on this page. Let's scroll back. Here is the ubiquitous Vanguard Axewound, so we're definitely dropping 2 of those in. Phenomenal card. Here's our first relic. We're absolutely going to drop 2 of these Staff of Roots in. It does 1 damage. It has Twin Strike, though, so you can actually do 2 damage to something. And then once it's unequipped, it summons you a 1/1 creature, which is a walking plant, and walking plants will heal you for 4 when they die. So this is a great relic to have. Skeleton Heavies, we talked about stats. This thing is huge. We're going to drop 2 of those in if we have them. Let's see what we're at now. We're at 25 out of 30. I don't like anything else on this page. Let's keep scrolling. We're back to page 2 here. Blackjags have tons of stats. Again, it's a 2 mana creature, so maybe a 2/3 would be normal, but it has, again, the quote-unquote downside of confused, so it is a 3/3 for 2 mana, and it has regen, so this card can absolutely stick around early for a long time and become problematic, especially if you buff it with something like a Shield Bearer and make it a 4/4 with regen. That just becomes almost unbearable. So we're at 27 now. We could put in Wild Hogs. We could put in Trial Spirits. We could put in Shield Bearers. We've got options here. Let's go back to the first page. We got those Shield Bearers we talked about. They're huge to have. Effectively, it's a 1 mana 2/2 because it gives out +1/+1, which is not overstated, but the fact that it can put this +1/+1 on a creature that is already on the board and can attack immediately. Anything that can change the board state immediately is going to be huge for you, because you can immediately suddenly make a trade that your opponent didn't expect. If they had like a 3/3 and you have a 2/3, they might think, okay, I'm safe. But then I suddenly drop my Shield Bearer on my 2/3. It's now a 3/4. I kill their 3/3. My creature lives. Theirs is gone. That's a huge swing. So we'll put in 2 Shield Bearers. These Marshwalkers are phenomenal with Shield Bearers. We've only got 1 space left. Unfortunately, there's so many good cards still. The Athenian Archers are good. We can ping off any wounded creature that's just still hanging around. We've got the Drider Sailweaver has ward, so if you're seeing a lot of spells coming your way, you might want some ward. I'm not so high on the Driver Sailweaver anymore because literally everyone runs 2 Axewomen, and the Axewoman will take out your Sailweaver and survive. So you don't want to put this out, let them take out your creature and have theirs survive. We're looking for stats. I like a Marshwalker for sure. But we also had the Wild Hog is really nice. And Trial Spirit basically is the same as the Shield Bearer in the sense that you can make trades that your opponent didn't expect. Like if they had a 3/3 and you have a 3/3, you can play a Trial Spirit, buff your 3/3. Your creature lives, theirs dies. So those are nice as well. Let's look at our curve. So we have 10 2-drops. I do think we have too many 4-drops, so I am going to go ahead and take out this Wetlands Ogre. And now we've got space for some Broccolis, these Marshwalkers here. And we even have one more space left for whatever we want. Let's throw in a Trial Spirit. So Trial Spirit is basically like a Wild Hog in that it has 2/3 worth of stats, or sorry, 1/4 worth of stats. Effectively, it can give +1 health. So it has 5 stats for 1 mana, but it's not confused, and the Wild Hog is confused. So I do think the Trial Spirit is better than the Wild Hog. And there you have it. We've got ourselves a nice curve here. Let's take a look at our PowerPoint and look at that mid-range curve. So here we had 7 and 8. That's 15. And here we have exactly 15 1 and 2 drops. That's perfect. We've got 2 7-drops, 2 6-drops. We've got 3 7, 3 6s here. So you could go a little bit heavier on the back end here if you need it. So basically, the last tip here is that you can now try this out. Give it a few games. Don't just play one game and say, ooh, I got wrecked. It must be bad. You might have gotten a bad matchup. You might have gotten a good matchup, but you might have gotten a really bad mulligan. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. Maybe you just need to get used to the mulligan. Maybe you mulligan for the wrong cards. So, maybe you got stuck with 2 green giants and a hunt in your starting hand, and you just watched your opponent play cards for the first 3 turns. It doesn't necessarily mean you should just rebuild your deck immediately. I'd recommend playing at least 5 games before you start tinkering, unless it's just quite obvious that, oh, maybe I should take out that Marshwalker and put in something else or whatever. But play a couple games for sure, and then start tweaking. If you have any other questions in the comments below, again, make sure you hop in the Discord. Many friendly people there will answer questions. You can just paste in this exact screenshot of your deck list from GU Decks, and people can take a look at it and tell you what they like, what they don't like. So that's going to do it for this deck building tutorial. I hope you guys found that helpful. If you have any other questions, you can leave them in the comments below. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're just at about 1,000 subscribers right now, so thank you guys sincerely. It's amazing. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next week for more Gods Unchained. With